Picture this. You have no past, no parents, no grandparents, no land from which your relatives came, no traditions, no family histories or heroes, no memories. Now imagine erasing your past on purpose. Without knowing the past, how would we understand ourselves? Unfortunately, that's what we are trying to do as a country. We're trying to erase our past. And in doing so, we lose the wisdom of those who founded our country, persons uniquely educated and positioned in history, politics, philosophy, and religion like no one before or since. And though they weren't perfect, their legacy has enduring value both here and around the world. One important part of that legacy is that America is not supposed to be a democracy. We are a republic. We are a republic because democracies eventually lose their freedom. The founders wanted a government that would represent the interests of the people, that's the democratic part, but whose power would be limited by law, the rule of law. Democracies, by contrast, create governments with unlimited power. Just look at the path America is on now. Look at how every problem supposedly has a solution that grows the power of government and shrinks our self-government. The founders believed in the moral right of citizens to be ruled only with their consent. After all, one of the rallying cries of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. But they also knew that people need protection from their own desire for more and more government. In short, we have a moral right to control our government, but we do not have a moral right to abuse that control. The founders didn't think of tyranny as someone else, someone who necessarily opposed the people, the term usually deployed by tyrants like Mao or Hitler to get what they want. The founders understood tyranny as something that people did to one another. A majority or a minority use the power of government against others. In the Federalist Papers, Madison called this a faction. Factions, he said, are wired into human nature. We divide over conflicting opinions and competing interests. Madison had two solutions to faction. One, because there was no way to prevent them, let them multiply and compete against one another, but give none of them an advantage in law. Therefore, two, limit the power of government to cater to them. Here's one example from the Constitutional Convention. As I said in another lecture, Congress can raise an army, enable post offices, and grant patents. However, the delegates did not agree that the federal government should either fund canals or create a national university. Both proposals were likely rejected because neither would benefit the nation as a whole. That's what is meant in the preamble to the Constitution by the general welfare and common defense. If the founders rejected this kind of federal favoritism, why are there so many federal programs by which some gain at the expense of their neighbors? Here are a few. Social Security for people already worth millions of dollars. COVID checks for people who just worked from home. Tax-funded subsidies to buy expensive electric cars. Let's face facts. Despite all the constitutional limits on government, it can be used by greedy voters and politicians. That's why the only real check on tyranny is the character of the American people. The American founders made it quite clear that if we neglected self-government, no constitutional limitations could save us. They learned from Plato, Aristotle, Polybius, and Plutarch that republics are fragile things, They saw the warnings of the prophets in the Old Testament against the vices of the people. If we restrain ourselves voluntarily, we need very little government. But if we cannot rule ourselves, we get tyranny or anarchy. We get anarchy because we refuse limits. We then get tyranny because anarchy is intolerable. G.K. Chesterton wisely said, "If men will not be governed by the 10 commandments, they will be governed by the 10,000 commandments." Those 10,000 commandments will likely come from our governments. James Madison wrote, "We have staked the whole future of American civilization not upon the power of government, far from it. We have staked the future of all our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind for self-government." The deciding question is not whether or not we'll have rules, but where our rules will come from. I started by talking about family and family stories. Here's one of our American family stories, first recorded in the diary of James McHenry of Maryland, one of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. The story is about Benjamin Franklin and Elizabeth Powell. You know who Benjamin Franklin is, but probably not Mrs. Powell, a politically well-connected and savvy lady. She and her husband were good friends with George and Martha Washington, among others. McHenry writes that after the Constitutional Convention, Mrs. Powell asked Dr. Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." America is a republic, but only so long as the American people want it to be, and only so long as we remember the wisdom of our past.